Good afternoon, everybody. Happy Friday to you. You made it to the Friday afternoon rush, May 2nd, 2025. I have all of your stories for your rush hour ride home. On today's episode, we have an update on the basketball lawsuit as a fundraiser has been put together to help the family targeted by an angry neighbor. And we've also got an angry White Lotus star shutting down the conversation about the showmance that might have happened. We'll share what Walter Goggins had to say. And Greta Thunberg comments on Gaza as a humanitarian aid ship has been bombed by several drones. Also, Blake Lively was on Late Night with Seth Meyers, a show that nobody watches, but we're here to discuss exactly what she said. We reported this morning the transcript, and now we have the video, and the comment section has been turned off on the YouTube video from Late Night. Can't take the heat, get out the kitchen. We'll have that, plus a conversation to due process as President Trump explains why he doesn't want to provide due process for illegal immigrants. As he gives a commencement speech at University of Alabama. Well, luckily, we have what's called the 14th Amendment, and I'll read that for you guys. And Kate Max, a influencer, TikToker who makes jogging videos, is under fire for her guest. She interviewed Caroline Levitt. I'll share all those stories and more. It's all happening right now on The Rush. Well, we hit the internet by storm this morning by covering the Bachelor Clayton Echard story, so let's jump in on that. Will Laura Owens do time? That's the question, of course. She committed medical fraud, perjury, I guess possibly wire fraud, possible extortion, as she threatened to sue Clayton for $1.4 million. She obviously threatened to sue me for $120 million, and so on and so forth. So the question is, what might come? According to my sources, this is information, right off the press here, it looks like they're continuing to investigate the timeline of events that led to Clayton's case. So not just Clayton's case, but what might she have done in the past? Will they be revisiting the Native American that she scammed, the contractor? I truthfully don't know, but I think the charges could rack up to a total of 20 years in prison. My guess is they'll offer her a plea deal to admit to all that she has done for a 1-year sentence. That's just my guess. I also think it could be several months before we find out any more information, but it is good to know that they're still actively investigating. All right. Well, the St. Louis Park, not St. Louis, Missouri, St. Louis Park, Minnesota. Why be so confusing? Why do you have to have St. Louis in Minnesota? Anyway, their family is launching a fundraiser after neighbors sue them over basketball hoop placement. So they launched a fundraiser and they received so much money that they're now going to be donating some of it to other places. Here's a clip from the November 18th city council meeting where the neighbor claims it was agonizing hearing children dribble a basketball. Have a listen.
Immediately in front of my door. I cannot walk out of my door. If I park my car in front of my door, I'm face to face with them, and balls are flying directly at me.
The neighbors took the battle to the city council in November.
Got the ball, brought it back, and that is enough to get a restraining order.
Moding questioned a restraining order filed against her husband, which has since been dismissed. In February, a new lawsuit was filed against the Modings in the city of St. Louis Park, the neighbors stating that the hoop should be considered a sport court within city code, which would then make it too close again.
I feel a little bit like I'm walking on eggshells in our own property.
But last week, another action was filed requesting the family not use the hoop until the matter is resolved in court. The lengthy legal battle led Moding to launch an online fundraiser to help with fees.
I really wanted to teach our children that when there's an injustice, you stand up to it.
Yeah, stand up to injustice. Now, I know people are mixed on this. They say, oh, basketballs are so annoying. Okay, but isn't that part of the risk when you have a neighbor? Sometimes they do weird things. Maybe they are obsessed with Jimmy Buffett and play It's 5 o'clock somewhere at 3 p.m. Goddamn, who knows? Who knows? It's you deal with some neighborhood stuff. Maybe they could plant some trees in between that kind of buffer the sound. I don't know. But, I really like to see this mom standing up and not backing down. I mean, I'm sure her boys are going to be really proud to see that. So again, if there's anything more to the story, we'll be covering this. We are now a St. Louis Park, Minnesota breaking news channel. That's what we are over here. All right, Walton Goggins, not Walter, excuse me, Walton Goggins, the old Walgo, says we're not going there. Ends an interview after Amy Lou Wood questions. Of course, people have questioned his relationship with her. Was there a showmance? No one really knows. But they ended the interview. You know, we covered this Bill Belichick conversation where people were getting mad at his PR people, or at his girlfriend of 48 years younger, Bill Belichick, not Walton. And because if Walton Goggins had a girlfriend 48 years younger than him, that would be a problem because I think he's in his 50s. But that's not another point. So with Bill Belichick, his girlfriend Jordan has operated as his like PR person and was shutting down questions. But here he was asked about Amy Lou Wood, the woman who was his romantic interest in the show, and he's not answering. He was asked a question like, did you guys have a falling out? He said, I'm not going to have that conversation. An unidentified publicist who was present then said, we're not going there. Thank you. The other publicist in attendance said, next question. Goggins is of course going to be hosting SNL in a couple of weeks, which will be a great episode because Goggins is a fantastic actor. When he was pressed about the relationship, Goggins said, there is no conversation to be had about that. Sharing politics on social media, it's in a vacuum. Asked one more time, Goggins responded to the interviewer, Ed Potton, what the F, Ed? Come on, buddy. Wow. One of the publicists then shut the whole thing down with, we're going to end it there. So again, is there more to the story? Either way, look, when you get these interviews, Walton Goggins has the right to shut it down. He can say, you know what? We don't want to talk about it. All right, well, here is Jeremy Renner talking about why he shut down Hawkeye Season 2. He was only offered a pay cut after Season 1.
They asked me to do a Season 2, and they offered me half the money. I'm like, wow, it's going to take me twice the amount of work for half the amount of money. And so 8 months of my time, essentially, and to do it for half the amount. I'm like, I'm sorry. Why? Did you think I'm only half the Jeremy because I got ran over? Maybe that's why you want to pay me half?
They wanted that snowmobile discount. Of course, Jeremy Renner almost died. He said one of his eyeballs fell out of his eye and he could see it with the other eyeball. That's how crushed he was. I don't know if that's true, but that's how crushed he was on life support after his gigantic snowmobile. He fell out of it and it ran him over in Lake Tahoe. But we're glad he's alive and we're glad he's standing up for himself. Greta Thunberg is standing up for innocent lives in Gaza as she shares this horrific story. Listen to this.
Last night, a ship carrying humanitarian aid to Gaza was attacked by 2 drones on international waters off the coast of Malta. 30 people were on board. And this attack caused an explosion and major damage to the vessel, which made it impossible to continue the mission.
Now, here's what's so scary and so sad to people if you're not following along with this is it's one thing, of course, to defend yourself and to defend your country, but it's another to cut off humanitarian aid to innocent lives. And that's exactly what's going on right now in Gaza. There are women, children, and innocent men starving to death that have not received aid in a very, very long time. So not only are they indefensible as they can't or they can't defend themselves from attacks, they also don't have adequate hospitals, electricity. Electricity is very much needed in the hospitals, water, food, and the aid that is coming in is getting bombed too. This is a nightmare. And if we ever were to put ourselves in the shoes of these innocent children and the people that live there, you would imagine that is a real life horror situation playing out. Now, the question is, why isn't more being done to protect the innocent people? And I mean, look, it's 2025. There should be very little collateral damage when it comes to these wars. Now, you might say, well, there's tunnels underneath the hospitals and they're hiding hostages next to. I understand that. It is very complicated. And Hamas is a terror organization, right? Hamas is a terror organization that is simply hiding behind and weaponizing the innocent lives. But that doesn't mean that you run them over and starve the innocent to death to get to the terrorist. That doesn't solve anything, because then the terrorists say, look what they're doing to our people. And then they create a bigger army, and the problem goes for another 100 years. So I don't know what the solution is, but it should not include starving innocent people. Full stop. I am very confident in the stance I'm taking on that one. Well, let's get into the Blake Lively story. Highest highs and lowest lows this year. She said she's fighting for the girls. Blake Lively's fighting for the girls. I shared the transcript of this earlier, but now we have the video. I wasn't sure if it was going to make the final cut. It did. Maybe they're regretting it. Have a listen to this.
You had an intense year. I'm maybe not as totally informed about it as other people. But
I'm thrilled you're not doing Weekend Update right now, because you would be quite informed. So
Okay.
it's good, yeah.
Wow. So she's throwing shade at SNL for the jabs they've taken to Blake Lively. And they have. Blake Lively has become a punchline.
But were I to ask you about it, I imagine you're in a situation where you can't say much.
Yeah, I mean, what I can say without going too into it is that this year has been full of the highest highs and the lowest lows of my life. And I see so many women around afraid to speak, especially right now, afraid to share their experiences. And fear is by design. It's what keeps us silent. But
so fear is by design. And I have to pause just for copyright issues. I can't play the full thing. So I have to interject with my sort of my commentary, if you will. That's the fair use clause. So pardon the interruption. But what you see here, if Blake made up her accusations, which most people believe she did, she is now weaponizing the fact that women live in fear of retribution, right? Fear of retaliation, fear of abuse if they come out, and, whether it's with a partner or a boss or a power structure, whatever the case may be. Blake should not have had any fear whatsoever. She has been in the driver's seat the entire time, right? She has been the one who has named the conditions and the terms of whether or not she'll be on set and everything in between, to the point in which Justin Baldoni has provided the receipts that he's done everything from hiring a intimacy coordinator, one that which she didn't want to meet with beforehand, to, bending over backwards, quite literally. Maybe that's why he had to go into the hospital for that back injury. He was bending over backwards to make things perfect for her. And now she's saying, well, women live in fear. Maybe they do, but I don't think you are one of them.
I also acknowledge that many people don't have the opportunity to speak. So I do feel fortunate that I've been able to. And it's the women who have had the ability to use their voice that's kept me strong and helped me in my belief and my fight for the world to be safer for women and girls.
Now, Taylor Swift not using her voice to stand up for Blake Lively, as she's been mum on this since it broke. So, yeah, I think this goes to show that most people that, attend a Seth Meyers show, most people don't know the depths of what's going on. I genuinely believe this. Now, don't get me wrong. Candace Owens' video might have 3 million people, but in a country of 350 or so million people, I think most people don't know exactly what's going on. And for that reason, they don't want to pick sides. Just like Seth Meyers says, I don't really understand. Well, how nice to keep your head in the sand on this one as the host here interviewing her. But of course, I also don't blame Seth Meyers for having her on, because it's not his call. Sure, maybe he's a producer on the show and it's his show, but this is NBC Universal. Okay, this is bigger than Seth Meyers. He's just the second late night host of the night there. So nobody watches him. Quite literally, nobody watches these shows anymore. As a stand-up comedian, you used to go on late night TV and that's how you would make it. You would do a Conan set or a late night set and it would make your career. Literally, you could be Ellen DeGeneres, you get on Carson, and next thing you know, you have a sitcom. That's how it used to be. That world is gone. Now, if someone did Seth, I know people that have done Seth Meyers, and I have a bigger audience just from, peddling BS here in my underwear. But the point is that she's doing this like sort of mainstream media PR run. There's no way she's going to go on any podcast that cross-examine her right now. She's going to say, oh, I can't talk about it, X, Y, and Z. But she's double dipping here because she's still promoting her, films, and she's doing the media rounds and starting to make her way out there. But these conversations are highly rehearsed beforehand. All the questions are pre-approved, and it's safe. And, people don't want to live in a safe world anymore.
It's a pretty simple thing, but, nothing. Thank you.
So brave.
I'm certainly going to respect that you're in a position where you can't talk about it more. And I obviously think a lot of people hope.
So she says women need a voice, and I'm a voice for them, and then she doesn't talk, and that's just how it works. But very interesting. I'm going to share what we have here from. This was shared by the It Ends With Lawsuits subreddit, but it is our good pals Keith Davidson and Stuart Albertson interviewing Judge Elizabeth Scherer. Now, what's interesting here is she talks about how damning it is what the accusations have been made about Justin Baldoni by Ryan Reynolds. Have a listen.
SEX predator is defined in any state as worse than a sex offender. In other words, there's sex offender databases where people have to be registered, and an SEX predator is even higher than that. They have to have done something that is so egregious and criminal, like a forcible rape on an underage child. At least in Florida, that designation makes you where you can be subjected to, you all, I'm sure, have different laws, but basically where you can be committed for the rest of your life, even when your criminal sentence is over.
All right, so the judge here explaining how weighted that predator term is, that it's not just a creep, it is a much deeper and darker level of a bad person, really. So what's interesting with this, sort of curating of brand that we have by Blake Lively and Ryan Reynolds is that Late Night with Seth Meyers did share the entire interview, but they turned off the comment section. Comment section are turned off. I'll tell you where the comment section is turned on my Instagram, The Rush Hour with Dave Neal, or on TikTok, D Neals. That's where it's turned on. You can see my clip here if you want to comment on it or share it or comment on any of the other clips we have. We're posting a bunch of clips every day, and that's sort of the go-to place where you can comment. And hey, maybe you'll meet some new friends in the chat room, right? Well, Billy Bush is commenting on the Blake Lively interview with Seth Meyers. Here's what he had to say.
A highly anticipated Blake Lively interview with Seth Meyers. And it's all worked out ahead of time. The Seth Meyers producers say, we have to ask about it. We have to, or else we're going to get mocked. So let's just open the forum, to which the Blake Lively people say, gotcha. She'll give a prepared statement. She'll have something to say, no follow-ups. And of course she did. But boy, was it elevated.
What I can say without going
all right, so then he shares the clip there. So yeah. And Billy Bush says it's a calvasade of cliches from Blake Lively. Her mentions are locked off about making the world safer for women and girls. Yeah, I mean, hey, it sounds good, right? Who's going to argue? No, it sounds good. Yeah, we want the world safer. We want people to speak out. That's all true. Now the question is, did you lie about your accusations? That's what it comes down to. All right, up next, we've got Donald Trump giving a rally speech of sorts at University of Alabama. Now, a commencement speech usually provides college students sort of a route to the life they should live. I'm bitter because I actually wrote a commencement speech when I graduated from the University of Rhode Island because students could submit a commencement speech. And I was like, I've lived my college life to the fullest. I want to share a speech. It never got, they chose somebody else. I would have killed it with my commencement speech. But Trump right here uses his commencement speech. So if there's any colleges out there that want me to speak, I am here. I'm coming to you. Let's go. But Trump, breaking news, Dave gives a commencement speech. Because my commencement speech would be like, your degree doesn't matter. Go make a TikTok account and live your life. So Trump's speech, he kind of talks about, he plays the hits about himself. It's all about him. But here he talks about why, I guess, illegal immigrants shouldn't have due process. Have a listen to this.
Judges are interfering supposedly based on due process, but how can you give due process to people who came into our country illegally? They want to give them due process. I don't know.
And that gets a tepid applause from the University of Alabama. Well, I'll explain it to you. How you give due process to people who entered our country illegally is by reading the Constitution, specifically the 14th Amendment. What they say is, no state shall make or enforce any law which shall abridge the privileges or immunities of citizens of the United States. So you say, okay, but if they're not citizens, do they get rights? Nor shall any state deprive any person of life, liberty, or property without due process or of law, nor deny to any person within its jurisdiction the equal protections of the laws. What that means is any person is not a citizen. Any person is, are you on American soil? If so, You cannot be detained without having a proper access to a lawyer. If you don't have a lawyer, the government will provide you one. There are so many avenues to protect people from just being swept up. And, if you're here illegally, well, you go to the immigration judge and you state your case and they say, no, you got to go. Or you talk about, hey, I've got these work papers. I've been working here, and maybe you get an interview and you get put on the path to citizenship, right? We used to live, and when I say used to, like 2 months ago, 3 months ago, we used to live in a world where people said, no, look, if you're an immigrant, you need to do it the right way. You need to come through the avenues that I came through, that my forefathers came through, and whatever. But we need to get rid of those violent criminals. Then they changed it. And then they said, well, if you're here illegally, that means you're a criminal, so you have to go. So now they've moved the goalpost. And I don't think that's fair. And I don't think enough people are talking about how that, how disruptive that is to continue to change the rules. And part of what is difficult here is that our populace is, for the most part, very uneducated about the rights that we have, not just as citizens, but anyone in our country. So here's a clip where we've got an argument happening out where people are saying, no, they shouldn't receive due process, and they're being fact-checked live on air.
Because they're not citizens. We do not owe them the same thing. Okay. It has to mean something to be an American.
Batia, hold on a second. I get the passion, but I really think it's important to really scrutinize what you just said. The idea that people do not have the right to the processes of the law just because they are not citizens is your opinion, but that is not how the law works. You know that, right? The president has the right to deport people. Okay, answer my question. You understand that that is not how the law works, that it is not true that just because your citizenship status does not mean that you do not get the same rights to legal process as everybody else in this country.
Everyone should come here. Everyone should come here. I think that the country, I'm answering your question. I am answering your very specific question. Okay. I think the country right now is very split. In fact, I just saw a poll yesterday from WIC, which was put out by 2A. The country is split almost 50-50 on this exact question. How much due process, how much of our investment and our money and our courts and our time do we owe people who committed a felony as their first act on U.S. soil?
The question is all of the bandwidth of the judicial system. And if the judicial system cannot hold up due process, you need to hire more judges. You need to build the system, right? You don't rip down democracy because it can't handle the bandwidth right now. And I guess that proves my point that the country's 50-50 on this issue. The country should be 100% on the issue of protecting due process. You always hear Republicans talk about, you can't have my guns, Second Amendment rights. How about 14th Amendment? We just discussed what it was. Everybody who argues for the Second Amendment should be just as steadfast in arguing for the 14th, which is saying, I will fight for the right for my neighbors, whether they're legal or illegal, to have proper representation in our court system, and then we can figure out the truths that way. All right, big story here. Kate Max is a running influencer. She always asks questions like, want to go take a run with me? And then she has these conversations. Well, she did one with Caroline Leavitt, and it blew up in her face. And she deleted it, and then she reposted it, and then she deleted it again, and then she reposted it again. She's getting love and hate for this. The running community is not too happy. Here's just the intro clip.
Hey, how many miles are you running today?
No miles because we're at the beautiful White House, but why don't I give you a tour?
Let's do it.
So then Kate Mack gets her balls washed, metaphorically speaking, as she gets a tour of the White House. And you might say, Dave, what's the problem with a tour of the White House? Well, it really comes down to what I've been saying all along, which is this isn't your grandmother's White House. This isn't, well, I'm on this side versus that side. It's the White House that is disobeying Supreme Court rulings. It's the White House that is rounding up people and getting them out of the country as quickly as they can before a judge tells them to turn the planes around. And, the Rush Hour podcast is all about sharing trending news, and this story is enormous as people are calling out the influencers saying, hey, by all means, you can use your platform for whatever the heck you want, but you are being duped. Here's one person's response.
So you're telling me with all the privilege and all the platform that you have, it never crossed your little tiny mind to say, I interview people while running. Maybe I should interview an immigrant who has had to run for their lives. maybe I should interview a person of color who's had to fight for their life. Instead, you said, no. With this privilege and with this platform, I think I'm going to go to the White House and interview that demon woman, KK Caroline.
Now you might say, well, is she really a demon woman? Well, I'll just say this. Obviously, the press secretary, they try to bend and they try to spin the news in the direction to make their boss look as good as possible. That's obvious. What I don't like is that she'll hide behind her Christianity. She'll hide behind like good moral values as a young mother while just spouting out bold-faced lies. Take, for instance, this one where she tries to weaponize the judicial system and complain about a judge when she's immediately fact-checked.
And this Judge Boasberg, is a Democrat activist. He was appointed by Barack Obama. His wife has donated more than $10,000 to Democrats, and he has consistently shown his disdain for this president and his policies, and it's unacceptable.
You're right where I wanted to go about the idea that these people are all foreign terrorists, but Judge Boasberg was originally appointed by George W. Bush and then elevated by Barack Obama. I just feel like I should clear that up.
So, I mean, she seems pretty smart. Like, she knows what she's doing, right? And she's complicit in that. And I think that's a real problem when people can't live in the reality we live in. You know, like, not everybody has Trump derangement syndrome because they just think he's a bad guy. It's because they know they're getting their leg pissed on and being told it's raining. And people don't want to, they don't want that. And it's not, these political activists that are all progressive. A lot of the judges that are standing up to Trump right now were Trump-appointed judges, including, here are some thoughts from someone who worked in the first Trump administration.
I want to weigh in on the Kate Max drama just because I'm someone who worked in the first Trump White House and ended up resigning and have spent the last 4 years now being a very outspoken critic of his, trying to undo some of the damage that I helped cause. So seeing her platform Trump's top spokesperson on her TikTok and podcast is really frustrating. Now, I'm someone who grew up conservative. I've worked in Republican politics almost my whole career. And I used to get really frustrated not seeing Republican politicians or conservative voices represented in things like social media or pop culture or fluffy magazine interviews. And I get that Kate is saying, look, I'm giving voice to both sides. I was at the Biden White House. I interviewed Tim Walz. Now I'm doing the same for Trump's administration. But the thing is that this is not a normal Republican administration. This White House is actively taking away people's rights and pushing us toward authoritarianism. So you don't get to say, oh, well, I'm just being fair to both sides. I don't know Kate's background, if she's a trained journalist, but I just feel like you shouldn't put these types of people in these settings where she isn't going to push back on their lies or their bullshit that they're spewing. I don't know, content creators can use their platform how they see fit, but I just don't think we should be normalizing or humanizing these people.
Yeah, and what it comes down to is this. Where's the conversation about all of the promises? They said they would cut Doge checks. That's not going to happen. They say they were going to have tax cuts to the middle class or even tax the wealthy. They're certainly not doing that. They were going to audit the Pentagon. Well, the Pentagon's about to get $1 trillion budget. Where does all of this money come from? Will they be cutting Medicaid? Will they be cutting healthcare programs for the poor and for the elderly? Will they be gutting Social Security? We already know they're getting rid of Social Security offices and telling people they can no longer get phone calls, so then they have to go in person, but then there's nowhere to go. So are they just making the system work so poorly that then they can claim, look, it's broken, we need to get rid of it? And these are questions people have. So Trump continues to lie and say, yeah, gas prices are down and it's, they're, this and that and groceries and that's not the truth. The truth is that store shelves are about to go bare because there's no imports coming in from a ridiculous tariff war, a war that we haven't even seen the real results of yet. This is like sort of a ticking time bomb happening right now, as I believe the stock market and people have their blinders on and they're saying, you know what, let's just deal with it as it comes. So for so long, Trump made all of these crazy claims and he didn't act on all of them. And people just said, oh, that's Trump being Trump. And now we have prison systems in El Salvador. Now we've got people, getting deported and laws coming around, amendments, right, signed through by the Congress that are saying it's it's okay for ICE to deport U.S. citizens. So at what point do we say, oh, he's still playing? And at what point do we lose the fabric of democracy? What side do people want to be on? That's my question. All right. Well, what a good week we had. Right? What a good week we had. Lots in the news. Good stories, tough stories, but we were here to cover it all. As you guys know, Friday afternoons, that's our big chance to leave work, put our middle fingers up, put our middle fingers up and tell our bosses to go fuck themselves, right? But it is, look, don't take it personally, bosses. It's just it's a real FU to capitalism. That's what it is. So enjoy your weekend. Go out there, do something I wouldn't do, and then some, and have a good one. I'm Dave Neal, and this is The Rush.